in 1986, when I was the leader of the opposition, I was approached by somebody in the American War Memorial that had come to put the flowers there
Okay, yeah.
for the commemoration we have on Poppy Day, right? And the guy said, "Look, you're the leader of the opposition. You know, when the ceremony finished,
Yeah.
do you mind if we go for a drink somewhere?" And I said, "Yes, sure." So we went to a bar that was next to in Main Street. That was in a corner next to where Mothercare was, right? Which was, we had a different name in that day. And he said, "Look, I am the consul in Tangier. And I'll come straight to the point. I've come to Gibraltar because I've been instructed by the embassy in London to come here to meet you and to talk to you." I said, "Okay." He says, "Because we've got a program which is called the International Visitor Program, which is financed by the United States government, where we invite people for 1 month to the States to get them to know us better. And we pay all the expenses, we pay your fare, we pay everything. And we want to offer it to you." I said, "Well, they're very generous of the American government. Why do they want to do this for me?" He said, "Well, we do it to people who are left-wing. And we know you are a very left-wing trade unionist. We don't normally do it with Europeans. Most of the people that we do it with are either in Asia or in South America. And it's people that we know are going to play an important role in their countries. And therefore, if we think they've got a biased view that is negative of the United States, we say to them, okay, well, look, come and see for yourself." So effectively, what we're telling you is, you probably have only heard bad things about us in the left-wing circles politically and in the trade unions that you normally are. You're absolutely right about that one. I said to the guy, he says, "Well, we know that, but I'll be totally frank because we Americans are like that. The point is that we are worried about what's going to happen in the Mediterranean because of this the Papanderos has come back into Greece and is not very pro NATO, and then the second in command in Spain was very anti-NATO and anti the American bases, right? In the socialist government in Spain at the time. So we were concerned about that, and I said, "Yeah, but what's it got to do with me?" He says, "Well, you're going to win the next election." I said, "Yeah." "And who says that I'm going to win the election?" He says, "Well, the CIA say you're going to win the next election, and that's the advice that they're given to the White House, and you're going to win it in 2 years' time. And therefore, we want to give you the opportunity to come to the States. You can go wherever you want. There will be nothing kept away from you. We'll give you a tour of the Pentagon to show you that we trust that you are a reasonable person and that you may be biased against us because we only had one side of the story. We'll take you to the Virginia Naval Base, which has more people employed than you have citizens in Gibraltar." And then, you make up your own mind. And I said, "Okay. So what you're telling me is that you want me to come over and risk being converted to capitalism, all right? So I'm willing to take the risk." And I went to the States. Before that, they invited me to the embassy in London. The embassy, the ambassador explained what it was about. He said that at the end of the month, I would be asked to go back to London and do a debrief and to see how the program was working and what how I felt about it. They put a, a, a man that was in the State Department who had been in the embassy in Paris. His name was Perry Stiglitz, right? And when I won the election in 1988, Perry Stiglitz had retired, and I opened an office in Washington and made him our man in Washington.
Vale.
And that's how Perry Stiglitz represented Gibraltar all these years. And he was the one who was my guide or or the guy that was making sure of what I was doing. But we became very, very close friends. And we were totally open. We were very right wing. And, but very honest. I mean, you know, not right wing in a bad sense. Right wing in the sense, not anti-working class, but more right wing in you know, in his perception of reality, because he came from a wealthy family and because he had married a princess of Laos.
Wow.
And it's very cultured, you know. Wanted to take me to operas and stuff like that. I said, you take me, don't want to do that. I want to see capitalism. So when I get there, they said, do you want to have a meeting with the trade union leaders? We go to Washington, you can meet all the trade union leaders. I said, I think you would live to regret it if I made all of your trade union leaders. I don't think much of them, and I think they would learn from me rather than me learning from them. So they said, you want to meet politicians? I said, not really. What I know about capitalism is the negative side of capitalism, and I know that it is bad because of the effect it has in uh, driving societies into two camps. One which has a bigger chunk of the wealth, and one that produces the wealth but gets less of it.
Yeah.
And that is how I perceive the system, and that is what most socialists think is happening. You say something different is happening, and that capitalism is a force for good. Okay, convince me. So I want to meet your capitalists. And I went to many places in the States, and I also asked to go to Hawaii because there was an independence movement in Hawaii, and I wanted to talk to the people who were there. But I met a guy in a company in Boston, right? And I think it was they made steel, and it was a headquarters, right? And the office block with the headquarters had more people than the population of Gibraltar in the one block. Right? And this guy was the one that was running it. And talking to him was like talking to somebody that was discharging electricity. The you know the ability to come up with ideas, and when I met that with different people who were the engines of the capitalist system, I said there's something in capitalism that we're ignoring in socialism. They've got people who are workaholics, who are brilliant, who are problem solvers, right? And this is the engine. The capitalist system works because of this engine. There's no reason why we shouldn't have an engine like that in socialism, right? So problem solving instinctively, people who are innovative, at the end, they finish up in the capitalist camp for a very simple reason. We're saying it now. Somebody that is brilliant and is at the edge of advancing knowledge in AI, one of these big companies comes along and says, okay, I want to hire you and I'll give you $10 million a year, okay? And they take the talent. So the capitalist system that we have today globally is a capitalist system that has the financial capacity to buy the people with the best brains and the most initiative.
Hey.
Right. But of course, the contrast with that is the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China is theoretically a communist country and is doing the same thing.
A hybrid system.
Well,
I think they morphed into a hybrid of capitalism, socialism.
You have, they allowed people to become mega companies, but at the end of the day, if they cross the line of going against the Communist Party, their money won't save them.
Yeah. Right.
But as long as they don't interfere with the Communist Party, they're allowed to get rich.
Yeah.
You know, the guy that was Alibaba was a millionaire, and then he said something wrong, and then it suddenly disappeared for a couple of years.
Okay.
Right? But that harnessing the power of individuals, right? And therefore, we have a situation where the socialists in the Western world have sometimes underperformed compared to the capitalists by being not as innovative and not as productive. Mm-hmm. So the guys that believe in capitalism say, well, look, okay, I am the guy that is producing everything. I am the one that is productive, so I keep it for myself. No? And I share as little as I need to, right? Whereas you can use the harnessing of the power of that individual and create the wealth and make sure that the wealth is then spread in another way. So that is the concept that I came back with from the United States in 1986. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, look, what we're going to have in the socialist government in Gibraltar is not the traditional kind of socialist way of doing things, but being innovative, and maybe we need to reward people to be able to engage them to be innovative. But what we want to do is work at a speed, because the previous communist economies in the Soviet Union and before, in the years of Mao and in other places, were a disaster because of the decision making. The decision was all. I've talked to people from those areas that I've known. When I've been to places where we had meetings with people from Socialist International and stuff like that. And the problem in those areas was the bureaucracy. And the fact that somebody, for example, in the days of the Soviet Union, somebody would sit in Moscow and decide where they would grow wheat and where they would grow grain without taking into account whether the climate was what was the best crop for the climate. So you had a committee, and that was the committee that took the decisions. And there were lots of decisions that were taken which were wrong. There were decisions where people were said, you have to produce so many pairs of shoes in the factory. And even if you couldn't sell them, nobody was thinking, well, is it something that people want to buy? No. You had to do it, and you produce them, because otherwise you might finish up in jail for not producing enough. So those systems were, those totalitarian systems were a misconception, right? Yeah.
So was that, sorry then, Sir Joe, to interrupt you. So was that what triggered the shift of reliance from the UK defense-driven to private sector economy?
Just like when we were
That influence in USA.
fighting for parity,
Yeah.
my previous life was something that I was able to access, if you like, in order to come up with ideas, in order to be able to win our campaign for parity. When we went in government in 1988, we already knew what we wanted to do.
But was it influenced because of that trip to America?
Because I learned a lot from how they operated. And I learned that, look, speed to the market is the first objective. So that means you don't spend 3 years deciding what you want to do and then start doing it in the fourth year and lose the election. No. You spend years before you're elected planning what you want to do, and you implement it in the day one, right? So the most obvious thing was we have to find alternatives to the reduction of the MOD. I explained previously how the MOD actually was the source of income that brought money from the UK, and then that money filtered from the public to the private, and then from the private to the imports, and the money went back to the UK. This we were entering into a different area. That is to say, the money that would be coming in from the MOD was going to be less. It would still be going back to the UK, but there would be a gap, and something had to be done to bridge that gap. And the first thing that was obvious was that the state of our telecommunications was not up to scratch, right? And therefore, I had a contact and access to an alternative, which was the state-of-the-art alternative in 9X, right? And interested in getting a foothold somewhere in Europe because they couldn't break into anywhere because there was really a monopolistic system that the Europeans didn't give licenses to the Americans because they didn't want the American competition, right? So we had some interest from the Japanese, but I thought the 9X is better for us, right? And therefore I then went to the union, and I said, look, we have to bring in modern telecommunications, otherwise we're not going to attract investors to Gibraltar. I mean, you cannot, we were looking at bringing in gaming companies, and you had a situation in those days where we had a telephone exchange, and you had to book a call to London, and you were given a slot, and you were given a limited time. So, I want to put a bet in London, and they say to you, yes, well, you can call at 3 o'clock, right? But the thing is, you're going to have it at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, pasado. It's finished. The horse race is finished.
So I said to my union, look, we need to go into the private sector.
No other way.
This place, and they said, okay, there has to be a ballot. And I said, okay, I accept there has to be a ballot. I will talk to the people. And I talked to the people in the telephones in the city hall, and I explained it. And I said, look, I've been fighting for you for years. We had the fight for parity. Now we are the government, but we are the same people. We are the same socialists when we were in the Transport and General Workers Union as the socialists that are now the ministers. We're still working class. Pepito, Juan Carlos, we are still your people.
Yeah.
We're not saying this because we believe in privatization. We're telling you that we need to bring somebody in, and we need to get investment, and we need to change the way that we work.
We operate, yeah.
And there will be a secret ballot that the union will hold. And then I said to the union, to Harry Gomez, look, we will not force anybody to go if they don't want to go. So if we get a situation where there's a majority, I will tell the minority that they don't have to go if they vote against. They will be guaranteed another job in the government with the same pay that they're getting in the telephone department, right? There was only one person that voted not to go, okay? And I won't mention his name, but we put him to deal with repairs of telephones in the RGP and with the pay that he had before, right? And I thought, well, look, it's better for the new company that the people have moved willingly. Because if we are forcing somebody to go somewhere, then the answer is he's not going to be happy, and if he's unhappy, then it's going to be more difficult to make a success of the company. And I did that with all the groups that we actually took out of the government, right? And therefore, we had a situation where we created a company, which is now Gib Telecom, right? And the shareholding, the share capital was going to be 15 million, right? But I had no money. So I said to the Americans, who are going to bring in new fiber and
The infrastructure
and
they were gonna.
infrastructure and a new exchange and everything, right? I said, look, the company will have a value of 15 million pounds, okay? So you have to invest 7.5 million in cash, and I will have to have, I have to have invested an investment of 7.5 million, but I haven't got any cash. But I value as a Victorian exchange, which is unique, the exchange that I've got, I value that at 7.5 million. Okay, so I'm going to give you the exchange that we're going to close, and to pay for my 7.5 million shares. They said, okay, Joe. I said, now I'm going to give you a license, and that license will cost you 7.5 million. So they put in the 7.5 million. I put the exchange we had, taken out, and then I took out the 7.5 million of cash, which I needed the money for other things. And they were happy to do it because they wanted to get into Europe and they couldn't get in anywhere else. And Juan Carlos had a fantastic relationship with the Americans, and it went very well. And of course, without that, we would not be where we are today. Without that start, and that meant that when we brought the first company to Gibraltar, the other thing we did was somebody came to me saying that there was a company that was in Brussels, I think, at the time, that was interested in exploring the possibility of coming here. It was one of the household names of UK gaming companies. And I said, I will go there. And don't come here. I will go and talk to them. And I went there with a lawyer that had approached me. And I said, look, I want you to come to Gibraltar, right? And you are interested, but I want you to do it now. Okay? So you tell me, what do I need to do to convince you? Simple as that. And they said, well, look, we will want a period of that you don't give licenses to anybody else. Because exclusivity.
Yeah.
And we have a monopoly. I said, okay, I can do that because I'm not in the European Union. For goods, I could do it, right? The laws of monopolies at that stage was not something that we were applied. And I said, we are getting a special tax rate here, and the tax in Gibraltar is 35%. I said, okay, what tax do you want to pay? I said, well, look, we're talking about maybe 0.5 or 1% because then we're willing to pay a higher tax once we're established and making more money. But at the moment, when we first go there and we transfer there will be a huge cost to the move, and establishing a new product and a new market. It will probably will be very little profit, if anything. So we want to be able to recover the losses before we start paying you more tax. So can you do that? I said, look, in Parliament we can change. It was easier to do things in those days than now. We can change things in one day. All right? So I will change the tax law. And I said, just like that? I said, yes, I will amend the law by introducing 3 words in the tax law. I said, 3 words? I said, yes, no more than. So when it says 35, it will say no more than 35. But we won't see how much less.
It opens up.
And they came.
Yeah.
And that would be something that would be capitalist thinking, right? But the reality is that creating wealth is not a bad thing. Creating wealth is a good thing.
Because that led on to your landmark policies of the 50-50 housing and sending Gibraltarians free education.
The 50-50 houses, I mean, what I learned by going to the United States was to take decisions very quickly, to weigh up the options.
Let's go.
And let's go.
Yeah.
Okay. And you may get 5 right and 5 wrong, but you got 5 right. You can spend your life
trying to get the perfect way.
Which of the 10? And you never do any.
You never do any. Yeah.
So when we did the 50-50, there was originally the AACR were clearly going to lose, right? The situation was that Joshua Hassan had come back from London and they had bounced him into accepting the airport deal. I mean, before he had come out on a demonstration with me, which had been organized by civil servants against any deal on the airport with Spain, right? No joint airport deal. And in Parliament, Hassan's position was the same. And sometimes I took motions and he amended them to make them even tougher. I think because it helped him to go to London and be tough, because it was a unanimous. We passed all these things we passed unanimously. They were initiated by us from the opposition, but Hassan amended them, but he didn't weaken them, and in some times he made them harder, right? And I think he did it because it helped him to then take a tougher line in London with the UK, which I didn't need anything to take a tough line. I took a tough line instinctively anyway when I was there. So we have this situation that, having campaigned against it, right? The UK, this is before the period that in December when but the prelude to that. To understand what happened, you need to see what was happening before. In about July, I think it was, we had a situation where we had come out with this demonstration, right?
The 12,000.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then, Hassan comes back with a deal which I knew from the civil servants that were friends of mine, that in fact they were there in the hotel waiting to be called to be consulted, and they weren't called to be consulted. They were presented with a done deal, the finished product. And Hassan came back, and in he was diverted, right, to Portugal, I think it was, because of the weather. And I had a television debate with the Spanish minister, right? And it was very successful in terms of the points that I had with this guy, right? Um, and then when he came back to Gibraltar, he took the view that he wasn't going to carry on, and he resigned, and Adolfo took over in December, which was December of 87, and the election was in 88.
Do you know why he decided to retire though? Self-retire.
He decided, I am sure that because he knew he couldn't win the election,
Okay.
and he preferred to go rather than lose it,
Yeah.
and because he knew he couldn't deliver the airport agreement. He actually, in interviews, had said in the UK that this was good, but that if the people didn't want it, well, with the passage of time, they would realize that this was necessary for Gibraltar. Because he used to, Joshua Hassan was a man that created politics in Gibraltar, right? And what he did was, he was the leading figure in bringing back the expatriated population.
From the evacuation, yeah.
And he had a solid working class following. But he was not somebody that confronted the British government as a colonial power, right? He sort of negotiated with them, tried to dilute what they wanted, and then came back here and sold it to us. And people had trust in him and confidence, but there was no alternative to him until we came along, really. And therefore, we provided an alternative to the working class and moved the working class vote to us, right? And we provided a stronger position against colonialism than he did. And he always said, the British are our best friends, as if they were here because they were our friends. Well, it's true that we've had that there is a lot of goodwill in the United Kingdom for Gibraltar. That's true. But there was more in the past, I think, than there is now, because the goodwill came from a UK that no longer exists, right? A UK that was still proud of the Victorian Empire, right? And proud of a colony that was 100% loyal, right? And the closest colony to the motherland. So everything that was exported from the UK to the empire was reached Gibraltar first. So the Times of London was the first daily. The Gibraltar Chronicle was the second daily. The Boy Scouts first were in the UK. The first place outside UK was Gibraltar, right? Everything that UK exported in its culture to its empire reached Gibraltar first.
Yeah.
Because we were the first part that was British, but not part of the British Isles, right? So we were the closest to them in many, many ways. And we had always a neighbor that, depending on the political complexion there, was hostile or not, more or less hostile, but never really friends.
Yeah.
So it was different degrees of hostility in different times and with different regimes, right? So for us, the perspective was not the same as Joshua, because Joshua saw the risk, the threat, and there was always this fear that, well, what about if the UK says, okay, well, look, if you're going to be bullshit with me,
Fend for yourself. So what happened when you became chief minister and you decided to move away from reliance on UK defence? Was there pushback from the UK, or were they happy that they didn't have to invest money into Gibraltar?
No, when we came in, I mean, it wasn't an easy entry. I mean, remember that in the middle of the election we had the situation of the IRA,
Yeah.
right? We had to cancel suspend the canvassing for a few days because of the IRA. So that was the entry to government. That was the first thing we had to deal with. The next thing was that because of the entry of Spain into the European Union, well, anyway, the airport deal was the thing that we said we're not going to
Yeah.
implement it, and that was it, right? So, but there were many other problems. I mean, we went in with a situation where the first thing I did in the first budget was stop the spending that had been planned by the AACR, and I introduced what I call the golden rule, which is a golden rule to this day, and which, in fact, the GSD government also accepted, and it is what Starmer's government tried to do when they were elected and failed.
Yeah.
And the golden rule is that you borrow money to pay for investments. So you borrow money to build a hospital, but you don't borrow money to pay the doctors. You borrow money to build a school, but you don't borrow money to pay the teachers. Because if you are borrowing money for recurrent spending, you will have to finish up borrowing money to pay the interest on the money you borrowed, which is where they are now in places like the US, where the interest is
more than the GDP.
the debt is in trillions and the interest is in billions.
Yeah.
And now they're not just borrowing money, they're
Government
borrowing
bonds
money to
selling
pay
to
the
everyone.
interest.
Yeah.
So I was very conscious of that, right? And therefore, that would be something that you would perhaps say, well, this is a conservative view of management. No, it's not a conservative view of management. There are things that we need. We must have blinkers and say, well, this is if you are a conservative, you do this, and if you are a socialist, you do it. If it makes sense, then we socialists should do the things that make sense, even if it's associated with conservatives. So you spend in a way that you don't put the country's future at risk, right?
I.e. the housing crisis and education.
So when we came in, we had a number of issues, and what we had was in the first issue was the Spanish pensions. We had a situation where the Spaniards had claimed the pensions. I mean, the whole story of this, probably there's very few people now in Gibraltar that remember how it all started. That when Franco crossed the frontier, right, Bob Pelissa offered the Spanish government, through the UK government, to transfer to the Spanish government all the money that had been paid in social insurance to the Spanish workers, who could no longer come in and who could no longer contribute. I mean, the reality is that there was a minimum level of contributions. So those people, many of them, would never have had a pension because they had not had the opportunity to carry on contributing. The Spanish government was saying when they closed the frontier, they were going to employ everybody over there. So Bopalisa said, okay, well, we give you the money they've paid here, and you credit that to their pensions there, and we remove the liability. They turned it down. The Spanish turned it down.
Okay.
They tried it a couple of times and they wouldn't have it. Right? So what happened was, of course, in the 15 or 16 years that we were isolated, pay went up. And therefore, insurance contributions went up. So when the Spaniards left, Gibraltar, the social insurance was something like £7.50 a year. It was 1 shilling and 5 pence a week, something like that, right? And of course, the pensions go up and the contributions go up. But these people have not paid any of the new contributions. So they paid £7.5 a year, and if they had paid for 20 years, they might get a pension of £25 or £50 or something like that. But if you had carried on paying, you would finish up with a pension that was a few hundred, right? When they went in a year before they were in, because we let them into under the Brussels Agreement, which was approved by the ACR and rejected by us, and we did not honor the Brussels Agreement, and that was the first row I had with the UK. And in the Brussels Agreement, what we did was we gave them EU rights in Gibraltar 11 months before they were in the EU, right? In exchange for opening the frontier. Oh, wow. And of course, the famous sentence on discussing the issues of sovereignty. Yeah. Where, as I said to you before, if you are detached from this, and you're in 1967, and Franco says, either you sit down with me and talk about sovereignty in accordance with the UN resolution, or I close the gates, and you say, close the gates, I'm not talking. Okay? And then fast forward, and you come to 1987, right? And you say, okay, I'm going to talk. I'm going to do what you asked me to do in 1967. Franco has won. Right?
Yeah.
Because that was the reason for the closure was the refusal to sit down and talk about the issues of sovereignty in accordance with the resolution of the United Nations of 1967. So, however you want to address it, it was a total capitulation on our part, as far as we in the Socialist Party were concerned. And that was the logic of it. And I challenge anybody to tell me if it's logical or not. Right? So we were not happy to have that situation that these people had come in. The UK said we don't have to pay the Spanish pensions at the rate that were being paid in Gibraltar, because they didn't pay it, and that was the argument they put to the EU. The EU said, okay, you don't have to do it in the 11 months that you have given them EU rights, because the rights that you're giving it is not rights that they're entitled to under EU law. But once they come in officially as EU members, you cannot discriminate and have one social insurance scheme for the people who were there before and another one for the people who were there after, because they are now both EU nationals and that's discriminatory. Yeah. We could have avoided this, and I told Joshua Hassan how to do it, and I remember that I couldn't convince him, and there was a guy that was advising him who was Margaret Thatcher expert on the EU, and I advised Joshua that what I was saying could not be done, and the guy was wrong and I was right. But Joshua said to me, Joe, you think you know more than everybody, you think you're always right. How can you know more than the expert that Margaret Thatcher has? Well, I knew what I was talking about. And if you had listened to me, we would have saved ourselves a lot of grief, believe me, because it was a nightmare situation. It cost the United Kingdom eventually £250 million. Okay? So we went in, and Joshua had been given money. So there was a pot of money, which was, I don't know, 10 million, something of that order, right? That was the money that they had paid and the interest that accumulated in that pot, which they had never accepted. And that was only money for a couple of months. So the and this was in 1984 when we had the Brussels Agreement. So between 84 and 88, you had a situation where the UK government told Joshua, well, okay, we will give you money for 3 years, which was the remaining 3 years that he had of his term. And then we will have to sit and negotiate again. We came in May, and the money that was supposed to last until December of 1988 was not enough, because the cost of the pensions that had been paid to more people than was expected. There were the figures that they had worked on how many people would survive worked out wrong. There was always stories about somebody's thumb being kept in a fridge and being put to collect the pension when it was no longer there, but I never knew if that was true. But the reality was that the money was going to run out in July or August and not last until December. Okay, so my first meeting with she's now in the House of Lords. I can't remember her name, but my first meeting was about the social insurance. It was the priority, even before I had the meeting with Jeffrey Howe to discuss about going to the Brussels talks, right? And she said to me, I went to the meeting. One of the things that I had, a skill that I had learned when I was in the union, a negotiating skill, right, was that I could read the things that were on a desk. You're the employer and I'm the union, and you put your proposals, and you're reading from the proposals that you put, right? And I could read
Upside down.
upside down the first 3 or 4 lines. Okay. And all I had to do was say, well, I get the point. That what I was doing was reading the thing upside down. So I went, the first meeting I went, I said, I don't know how this happens. So I asked, what do we do to go to the UK? And this is my first head,
As chief minister,
first chief minister going to London for the first time. I said, okay. They said, well, you have to take your team to London. Okay, who's my team? The financial secretary, okay, appointed by them. The attorney general, okay, appointed by them. I said,
you stacked one.
okay. So I went there with 4 or 5 heads, and this lady was sitting opposite, and I sat opposite her, and I had 3 or 4, and she had something like 6 on one side and 6 on the other, right? And she's got this paper, welcome very much. We know that you've got a different political philosophy, but with democracy, you had one with 58% for the vote. It's a very good win, and we want to work with you. We have a different philosophy with you, but this is the democracy. We have to work together for the good of Gibraltar. So there is a problem. I said, look, can I just interrupt you for a moment because it's something that's very important to me and I want to be able to tell you to put you at ease. She said, oh, okay. I said, look, I know that you've got a difficult problem in the money that has to be paid to the Spanish pensioners, which is something that is your responsibility. And that, this is too much money and we are not able to contribute substantially to it. We may be able to provide some amount, but the bulk of it has to be found by Gibraltar because this is a Gibraltar liability, and therefore we have to come to an agreement on this, and this has priority. And then she looks at the paper and she reads what I've just read. And then she looks to one side and she looks to the other side, saying, what have these buggers done? They've given me the wrong piece of paper. She says, yes, Chief Minister. Well, ya no sabía qué decir. Porque la headline se la había dicho yo a ella. Yes. I have other appointments now that I have to see other people, and I think perhaps, this is an introductory meeting.
Sácame de aquí, I need to get out of here.
So that was the first one. Pero ya yo sabía el camino por donde iban.
Claro.
Entonces, a couple of months later, we come back to the pensions. Y me dicen, well, we didn't get anywhere the first time, but now it's more urgent. The money is not going to last until December. Right? Okay? Well, we're not going to, we have to have another negotiation to see to what degree we're going to be able to help you in next year, in 89. But the money that we gave the previous government was on the agreement that the pensions will be paid, and indeed, that there is $1 million on the table because Joshua and Mr. Canepa, also Canepa, put £8 million on the table as the contribution that Gibraltar would make, which clearly is nowhere near enough. This is about 20 million pounds a year or 30 million pounds a year. I said, okay. I said, well, first of all, the £1 million is not on the table anymore. It's not, They go, do you know what I said in the campaign and in the manifesto of the election campaign that I've just won? And you're a Democrat, the same as me. We make manifesto commitments, and we have to honor those commitments, because that is what we've promised our people if they vote for us. So I cannot go back and renege on the manifesto and the promises I've made. And she said, okay, so what did you promise? I said, not one penny. So there's not £1 million, there's not one penny. There is no money on the table from Gibraltar. She said, well, that is not acceptable. They go, well, fine, may not be acceptable, but I have no choice because we're Democrats and we believe, you and I, you may be conservative, I am Labour, but we both believe in keeping our the promises we make in an election campaign.
Sacred, yeah.
That is sacred. That is above party politics.
Yeah.
And people have voted, empowering me not to give you one penny for Spanish pensions. That's the position. She says, well, this is very serious. I said, I know. It's very serious. She says, because in August, the pensioners in the campo are not going to get paid. I said, yeah, that's right, very, very serious. Yeah. And she said, you know what will happen, no? There will be riots. I said, well, possibly. And he said, and doesn't that concern you? You go, well, I don't particularly want that they should have riots. But I'll tell you something. If I paid, there will be riots in Gibraltar. And if I have to, I don't like riots. But if there's going to be riots, I prefer that they will be in the Campo area than in Gibraltar. So that's a position, you know? I mean, take it or leave it. I can tell you, not one penny will be put of Gibraltar taxpayers' money in something which is your problem because you're responsible for the international law and you're responsible for us in the European Union. She says, you will be sued by the union. I said, no, you will be sued by the union. I'm a colony. Don't have the power to sue or be sued. Okay? So either if they have riots, they probably the government will say to them, you don't need to riot, we'll take the UK to the European courts and they'll have to pay. Right? So they pay, obviously.
Yeah.
But that was the first friendly meeting that we had.
Started on a good foot.
The others were less friendly. Because at the end of the day, this was about money we didn't have. I mean, you know, they're running down the forces, right? Cutting down the MOD. I mean, and expecting me to fork out money when it's their fault because Joshua Hassan had not accepted the advice I gave him because he said Margaret Thatcher had said her expert said it couldn't be done. Okay? Well, I knew how to do it and I had it ready to do. And it couldn't be done. So after that hiccup, they actually paid and they put the money that part of the money that they used was money that had been given to Joshua Hassan as development aid, and he had not yet spent it, and they took it and used it for the Spanish pensions, which I thought was totally wrong because that was not what that money had been paid for by Parliament. The Parliament had voted for that money to be used for one thing, and they had been using it for something else. But in any event, when they told me about what they're going to do, I said, look, that's a matter for you. I think what you're doing is illegal in UK law. But in any case, I think you've got the obligation to help Gibraltar because we've come out of a period of isolation which has had us totally frozen in the development of our economy because of the fascist regime and because of wanting to stay British. But I don't want development aid money, okay? I will not have on my conscience that you are using the money that you should go to feed starving people in Africa and you divert it to me. We are not starving, right? I think you've got an obligation to give me support, but not out of the money that is to help developing countries where children are dying of hunger or they don't have clean water supplies. That's what that money has been. That is where the taxpayers of the United Kingdom, through their parliament, are saying the money should go. And you want to use the money for Gibraltar and development aid at the expense of people. I don't want the death of people on the continent of Gibraltar. You don't want to give me the aid that you should be giving me because you've got a responsibility to Gibraltar. Don't give it to me. We'll do without you. I got criticized for taking that at the time, you know, because people said, why are you saying no to the money? Well, look, it's a matter of principle. You need to stand up and say, you know, pero aquí me pito por los pantalones. So they carried on paying, and then I had the foreign secretary saying there's a meeting of the Brussels Agreement coming up, and He took me. In the second meeting, by the way, I didn't take anybody with me. Okay? And we got, I can't remember her name, she's in the House of Lords now. But we became very good friends.
Okay.
And I turned up, and I think I might have had one person with me, but I didn't take the UK guys with me. And she said, you haven't brought your team, Chief Minister. I said, no, correction. I haven't brought your team. I don't mind bringing them if you pay their fares, but I'm not going to use taxpayers' money to bring people here who are going to be saying yes to what you want, and I am saying no.
Claro.
So, that was the kind of friendly relations that we when we came to the Brussels process. This guy says to me, look, you have to, this is very important. This is something we are committed to do in the United Nations. Sir Joshua understood how important this was. And I said, yes, but I walked out of Parliament when Sir Joshua came back to put it to the Parliament. It was voted by him. We didn't just not vote in favor, we had a walkout and a demonstration against what he was doing. And I am committed not to go to Brussels. I am committed to kill Brussels, not to preserve it. So he says, yes, but you don't understand diplomacy. I said, well, I'm a trade unionist. What is diplomacy? That you say one thing and you do another? Is that diplomacy? She says, well, but look, it's a question of how we explain it. We can say how you're doing what is best for Gibraltar, but I said, but I don't think I'm doing what is best for Gibraltar. I think this is bad for Gibraltar. So I said, if I said, you tell me why it is so important that I should be there. He says, because you give it legitimacy. I said, because I give it legitimacy. Well, now you have totally convinced me. The last thing I want to do is legitimize the Brussels process.
They dressed it up. They want to dress it up by you being there.
Yeah, because so Gibraltar is in favor because I'm sitting there
Later.
and you're doing whatever you want, which was what they had done with the Brussels with the airport agreement, which really was the killing thing. I mean, the ACR was badly wounded in political terms by the airport agreement because they had been in all the demonstrations against it before. You see, that was the complete U-turn. So, and they couldn't shift me, right? And he said to me, well, look, if I can find ways of demonstrating to you how it will benefit Gibraltar, I said, well, look, you find ways, then, I don't want anything that's bad for Gibraltar. What's good? You find ways that show that it can benefit Gibraltar. I will go back and admit that I was wrong, and that Joshua was right, and that you are right, and that it's Gibraltar. But you have to convince me. You can, and I'm not convince me by saying I can spin it. I don't do spins.
Derecho, recto.
I'm like that. You like me, you hate me, but what you see, what you get.
Yeah.
So I said, well, at least if you are willing to consider if we produce new arguments. I said, yes, but I don't want to deceive you. If you really convince me because your arguments are things that I cannot counteract, and it shows that I am wrong.
I accept it.
I accept it. But I tell you something. If you are unable to do it, I will fight you every inch of the way if you try and do it without Gibraltar's consent.
Hey, circumvent us, I'll fight you every step. Yeah.
And we left it at that. And then I had no more meetings with the foreign secretary.
Because he couldn't prove it. He
Which
couldn't
I
convince
did,
you, sorry.
which was okay. I mean, I had enough to do here in Gibraltar, right? So we had committed to doing the housing, right, in the manifesto, and I think I told you what happened during the election campaign with the guy that came from Holland. Did I tell you that?
No,
in the last one?
no.
Oh, well, the headquarters was Transport House. We ran the campaign from there
Okay.
because we didn't have a place for the GSLP at the time. And when I was in the headquarters in Transport House, in the middle of the campaign, a guy came and one of the girls came up and said, look, there's a reporter, a newspaper guy or a reporter downstairs that wants to have an interview with you about the election campaign because the opinion polls are giving you a lead, and everybody thinks
You're on course to win.
we're on course of winning. So I said, okay, I'll see him. And he was a Dutch guy, right? And he said, well, what are your plans? I said, well, our priority is creating new land. And there is already the existing government is really already looking at that possibility to do housing, but we're looking to do much more in that area. And he said, and how do you plan? Do you have the expertise in Gibraltar? I said, no, we don't have it in Gibraltar. But I said, we will go to the UK, which is what we don't normally do, and bring experts from the UK. He says, well, don't you think you should bring them from Holland? Because the Dutch people are in the whole of Europe, nobody's got better experience than of reclamation than Holland. Holland was a place that was below sea level, and we've reclaimed huge.
They used to do the dams and then recover the. Yeah.
So I said, yeah, but I don't know anybody in Holland. So, what
point
I
is
do,
mute.
go to Holland and say, hey, I'm here from Gibraltar. So the guy went away. And then a week later, when we were further into the campaign, getting very near, somebody comes and says, again, there's a Dutch guy that wants to come and give you an interview. I said, well, same guy, no, a new one. I said, okay, bring him up. I said, look, I told your predecessor everything about the campaign, and he says, no, I'm not here to ask you about the campaign. He says, the journalist that interviewed you was based in Spain, in Madrid, and he's a radio journalist. He actually didn't write an article. It was on radio. And I heard it while I was on my way home on the radio in my car. And instead of going home, I went to Schiphol, flew to London, and have come here to see you because I am the marketing director of the second biggest reclamation company in Holland.
Pa' que tú veas. All the millions of.
And I won the job.
Wow.
And I said, okay, I'm not going to go to tender on this. You got the job. You are the kind of person I need. Okay? That's what I want. This is what this government is going to be. People with initiative. You don't sit in the car and go home. You come from the car, you come and tell me. So you need to do it in 9 months. And you need to give me a price that is very competitive. And then I'm not going to have a tender for the reclamation because it will either be you or another Dutch company, and I think the initiative that you've shown is enough to convince me that you're the kind of people that we need. So we won the election, and we contacted these guys, and they brought this ship, which was called Cheopotes II, which they told me was Earth Eater. And it used to go from to the east side and take from the bottom of the sea, which took, I think, 5 years to be replaced, right? And then they brought it into the harbor and they dumped it in the middle of the harbor, right? And everybody came to the harbor, and the mountain was below the water, and then you saw the top of the mountain coming out, and people used to go every day to see the mountain getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And the thing that changed between what we were going to do before and what we did after was, and again, you see, everything that I'm telling you is related to the kind of approach that I learned from having gone to the States. People with initiative, that's a guy, and forget somebody that comes with a lot of gimmicks. This guy is a doer, not a talker. So that's the guy we need, right? So when I took over, I had already been talking to the people that were going to be doing the reclamation, the companies that were going to be doing the reclamation here, which then employed Schiphol, and they did it with a company which had as a joint venture with them, right? And Hassan had and the ASR were going to do a plot of reclamation, right? Which, when I went in, I asked the technical people, now that I had the contact with them, about the cost and about what about doing something bigger. And it was incredible, because they said to me, well, look, if you do this reclamation, for example, it will cost you £10 million, right? The one that was being planned. But because the water inside the harbor is very shallow, it's no more that it goes from a gradient of something from 5 meters to 8 meters, right? But then once you go outside the harbor, you go a sudden drop to 25 meters, and then a sudden drop to 50 meters, right? So they're difficult you have to do a huge mountain before you reach the water level. But inside, it's not very deep. So they said what's going to be the bulk of the cost is the revetment of rock that you have to do to stop the sand being washed away.
Yeah.
So if you think of a square, right, like that, you got the two sides of the square. If I push the square forward and I push the square sideways, then the revetment is the same, practically, because the revetment that is extra is only the little square at the top. So I'm taking this out, so that instead of doing a table like this one, I do a table like this one and another one. But the revetment that would be where you're sitting is not going to be the same size of rocks and the same quantity of rocks where the door is. So it doesn't cost me more.
Yeah.
And if I go this way, it doesn't cost me more, because the rocks are going to be here and are going to be out here. So the extra cost was 50%, right? And the extra land was 4 times. So I was going to do 4 times the land at twice the cost. That meant that the cost per meter went down by 50%.
Yeah.
So I borrowed, I think it was 12 million, right? And then there was a lot of international interest, right, in everything we were doing, because of the things we were doing, because
The scale of it.
the scale of the things we were doing, the fact that we were not just going to UK, contact with Holland, contact with Belgium, and so they had some investors that came from Scandinavian companies, insurance companies, right, and they wanted to do development. and develop the finance center industry here in Gibraltar, right? But they were interested in investing in property and in offices. So there were two things that happened. The tenders for the housing there was no local companies. There were two Spanish companies, and there were a few pounds, a couple of £100 or £50 of difference between the two tenders, right? And I can't remember if it was 1,000 on each, but it was something like that. So the original plot was for 1,000, right? And at a certain price. And the money was there to do it already, because that was already being done by the AECR. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I'm going to double the land, right? And it's not going to cost me anything. And then I invented the 50-50. So now I'm going to do the houses and it's not going to cost me anything. Because if the government had, by using an example, 100 million to do 1,000 houses, I could do 2,000 houses with 100 million and put 50% and then sell the other 50%. And the people who couldn't afford to buy 100% could afford to buy 50. So we created the 50-50, and I did the land was doubled. So the original cost of the land was now double for the same price, and the original cost of the housing was now double for the same price.
I got you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other doubling, which went in the other direction, paid for the whole lot. So I sold the water to the Scandinavians and repaid the bank the money. So I finished with no borrowing, 4 times the plot that was original, twice the number of housing of home ownership, a third plot paying for the other 3, and one plot still available for more development.
Wow. And
that's where the whole of the finance center area of where the hospital is and all the offices.
Morrison's, Harbour Views, all that area.
That's how it all came in. Well, I think the reclamation created a massive asset.
Yeah.
And, but everything that I'm explaining to you, you can see the connection between what I said to you about what going to the United States changed my mindset. Mm-hmm. I looked at things with the eyes of a capitalist, right? And I use it with the heart of a socialist, right? So I made more land in order to house more people and created a scheme which gave an opportunity to local people to become homeowners, which then created the kind of society we've got today.
For the first time in Gibraltar's history.
For the first time. The home ownership ratio was 6% of the population when we started and 36% when we finished.
Wow. Yeah. So Joe, on that note, we'll end it there. Will be a part 4. There will be a part 5 because we only just scratched the surface of you being there. So Joe, thank you very much again for your time.